Hello everybody, this is an ongoing series examining the dungeon design in Zelda games. If you're interested, feel free to check out the previous videos in this series, but otherwise, let's hop into it. Last time, we covered Dragon Roost Cavern on Dragon Roost Island, where we received Din's Pearl, the first in a set of 3 plot MacGuffins that we need to collect. At this point, Mr. King of Red Lions will advise us to head directly south to find the next one. Just as an aside, when we start sailing, we'll be interrupted by this manfish, which basically unlocks our ability to fill out the world map, also known as the sea chart. On our way south, there's a couple of points of interest to stop at, but most important among them would be this submarine where we can get a second empty bottle. Eventually, we'll reach the Forest Haven, which is one half of a pair of giant tree-like islands. The King of Red Lions will advise us to seek out the Spirit of the Earth, the Great Deku Tree. And sure enough, if we follow the path up and enter the island's interior, we'll find him. But first things first, kill the choo-choos. So if you've played Ocarina of Time, you may have noticed that the Great Deku Tree looks pretty different here. That's because this Great Deku Tree is actually none other than the Deku Tree Sprout, the little sapling that grew after we completed the Forest Temple in that game. However, enough time has passed that he has now grown into an impressive, massive tree himself. Funny enough, when we first speak to him, he will begin speaking in Ancient Hylian, because he mistakes Link, the Wind Waker Link, for the Hero of Time. But when Link here can't understand Ancient Hylian, he realizes his error. He'll ask if the King of Red Lions was the one that brought us here, and we confirm that we are after the Goddess Pearl. He seems to understand the larger picture here, and remarks that the resurgence of monsters is a sign that Ganon has returned. He then introduces us to the Koroks, the Children of the Forest. We're actually just in time, as the Koroks are about to hold their annual ceremony. But of course, there is trouble. The Korok Linder will show up and tells the Deku Tree that another Korok, named Makar, fell into the Forbidden Woods. So of course, the Deku Tree asks that we make our way over there and rescue Makar. In order to reach it, however, we'll need a new item, so he gives us the Deku Leaf. Well, sorta. He sprouts it, and we've got to climb up there and get it. The Deku Leaf is basically Breath of the Wild's paraglider and Korok leaves combined into one, except this came first. We can glide with it, and also use it to prevent ourselves from any unnecessary fall damage. Combine this with any updrafts and being able to control the wind direction, and we have what is one of the most useful items in Link's arsenal. While using it, magic power is consumed, but magic drops are so easy to come by in this game that running out is very rarely an issue. With all of that, we can ride this updraft and float on over to the dungeon entrance. The Forbidden Woods is one of those dungeons that I never paid much attention to in my younger years, but revisiting it with a refreshed perspective has been very interesting. As far as architecture goes, it is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. These are woods with a lot of wooden stuff, and there's a lot of danger here, hence it being forbidden. But I don't always like to just accept things like this at a surface level. So let's jump back into theory territory again for this one. I'm sure I'm not the first one to come to this conclusion, but after I go through this dungeon, I personally believe that the dark and dangerous Forbidden Woods were once the peaceful Kokiri Forest as seen in Ocarina of Time. According to the King of Red Lions, the Forest Haven was once a much larger area with what he describes as throngs of lush forest islands. Based on the sprinklings of landmasses we get around here, it's not a stretch to say that the Forbidden Woods and the Forest Haven were probably once connected. According to this Korok Aldo, the Forbidden Woods were once the Korok's home, and that it was once a peaceful place, even remarking that we may find some of the Korok's houses still there. The Deku Tree also mentions that the Koroks once took the form of children, and yeah, there's plenty of evidence that the Koroks were at one time the Kokiri. In the Forbidden Woods, we can see the Kokiri symbol painted on pretty much every door, and the structures of those aforementioned houses are made in hollowed out tree stumps, just like the homes of the Kokiri. There's also a heavy population of Boko Babas, who are pretty much the same as Deku Babas from Ocarina of Time, which mostly appeared in, you guessed it, Kokiri Forest. And though I don't usually put too much stock in geography in Zelda, since it's usually so inconsistent, they both happen to appear in the southeastern corners of the map in their respective games. So yeah, I believe that the Kokiri Forest became this place, while the grove where the Deku Tree and the Deku Tree Sprout grew, which was adjacent to the forest on the east side, became the Forest Haven. Everything seems to point to this. For me, personally, this adds an entirely new and tragic layer of context to this dungeon. It's not just a forest-themed dungeon anymore. This was the very same place that the hero of Time grew up, where the children of the forest lived out their peaceful lives, but now abandoned and corrupted, a shadow of that memory. The music leans into that tragic feeling. There's some instrumentation that almost feels like hints to the Korok's past here as well. But then it always gets overshadowed by a more grim section. Much like with the last dungeon, it's far less memorable of a song than the theme of the Forest Haven right outside, but as far as the mood goes, it does achieve that ambience of this sad abandoned village so well. It's not scary or particularly tense, just sort of sad. It's really well done. The progression here pretty well sticks to what Dragon Roost established. We have a large open central room, and most of the dungeon branches off from there. Also, like Dragon Roost, the dungeon makes very good use of its verticality. Almost every room in this dungeon spans 2 stories, and often you'll need to ascend or descend in any given room to make progress. While this does make progression very interesting in a 3D game, in this dungeon it has the added side effect of making the dungeon map almost useless. Since you can't view more than a single floor at a time, often it's hard to make out where and how these rooms connect while looking at the map. But that said, the dungeon does a good enough job making its rooms interesting enough that you can almost forego looking at the map entirely and navigate based solely on landmarks. Most of the individual rooms are really straightforward, with the exception of some really BS treasure chests. Who put this here? As soon as we enter the foyer, we'll be ambushed by a group of green choo-choos. This dungeon is actually pretty relentless with how many enemies it'll be throwing at you in almost any given moment. Choo-choos aren't too tough though. The only door in here is locked by this flower creature, so we'll need to survey around the room before we can make any progress. Make sure to open the treasure chest on the right side of the room to get the dungeon map. I'm honestly surprised at how soon the dungeon gives the map to you, right in this first room, but since I almost never use it in the dungeon, it's no biggie. On the far left side of the room, we can find this huge Deku Nut, which we can throw at the bud blocking the door to destroy it. The second room is pretty open and massive. There's some treasure chests that we'll have to come back for later in this room, but for now you'll want to use the Baba Buds to launch yourself up to the second floor and use this bomb flower to destroy the plant on the door. There's another short hallway with a wind-controlled gondola type mechanism. You'll want to use the Deku Leaf to activate this propeller, which brings the platform over to you. Then you can blow your way over to the other side of the room. This next room will build further on the established concepts. We'll use these Baba Buds to launch ourselves to the top of the room, then use the gondola to cross the room, grab the Deku Nut, then cross back to the other door. And one more hallway. The Deku Nut here is protected by these vines, so use the leaf to blow the nut out of the vine circle and open the door. So those first 5 rooms, while using a lot of verticality, all took us basically in a straight line, bringing us to the central room, finally, while also introducing us to those mechanics in a fairly controlled setting. Here's where I would say the dungeon actually takes off in traditional dungeon fashion. This main room spans 3 floors, but like inside the Deku Tree in Ocarina of Time, the bottom floor is blocked off for now, so we'll need to explore up top first. You'll notice this suspended house with a big flower hanging in the middle of the room here. Just keep that in mind for later. We'll want to make our way up the path and we'll find a locked door, which we don't have a key for. Grab the Deku Nut and head further over, and you'll be able to open this door instead. Before going through, I recommend going up to the top of the room where you'll find this second cauldron. This will let us warp back and forth between here and the foyer, just like in Dragon Roost, but this time the cauldron is placed in a far more useful spot, being here in the central room. Now we can head through that doorway that we unlocked. There's a short hallway here where we'll meet these morphs for the first time. Again, in a controlled setting. They aren't harmful, but they will cling to you and slow you down. Spin attacks will deal with them easily enough. This takes us into this maze room. You'll want to carefully navigate around the room as vines will erupt from the ground. I personally tend to cut the grass as I go, so I know where I can safely walk, but as long as you take it slowly enough, you should be able to avoid damage. There's some barricades here in this room, which you'll want to use the bomb flower to destroy. This one closest to the door hides a treasure chest with the compass. Then if you navigate over to the second one, you'll find a key. Now you can use the Baba Buds to launch yourself up and back to the door you came in through. We can backtrack to the central room and spend that key on the locked door that we passed earlier. There's another gondola hallway. This next room has a handful of Boko Babas and a wingless Mothula. You should be able to take them on fairly quickly, and use the Baba Buds to launch yourself up to the second, then third floor. Just watch out for the P-hats. We'll find two doors here. The first is blocked by more vines, while the second we can head on through. And this takes us into the mid-boss fight against Mothula. If you've played A Link to the Past, then you already hate this guy, but he's nowhere near as difficult here. He'll rocket towards you and spawn morphs to slow you down. You can either knock the wind out of him with the leaf to break his defenses, or if your timing is good, wait for him to charge and parry. Each strike will remove one of his 4 wings until he's grounded. Then you can finish him off. This will earn us the dungeon item, the Boomerang. The Boomerang is a returning series staple, but gets a huge improvement in this game. You can now lock onto multiple targets at once and throw the boomerang, which will strike them all before returning. It totally defies physics in this way, but it's super fun. As usual, we get locked in the room, forcing us to use our new item to unlock the door. In this case, we need to hit both these switches. Now back in the previous room, we can put the boomerang to good use once more. First off, P-hats are much easier to defeat now. Same can be said for the Boko Babas. Now instead of hunting for a Deku Nut, we can simply use the boomerang to destroy these plants blocking the door. Now heading in, we find ourselves in the upper end of the room we passed through before. With all of these vines hanging down, the game lets us have some fun with the boomerang and allows us to get more comfortable with this new targeting system. Then we can glide across and head through the door back into the main central room. At this point, I actually suggest ducking into the cauldron back to the foyer to comb through some of the earlier rooms and get any chests that you couldn't open before without the boomerang, if you're looking for completion. But otherwise, what we can do now is cut the vines holding up that suspended structure with the boomerang, which drops it straight downwards, breaking the floor and unlocking the basement floor of the room. If you head down, there's a single door to go through here. We'll find ourselves in this hallway, which has a split in the path. The left side has a ledge that's too high up, so we'll have to head right. Just watch out for the Dexy vines. Hey, don't you grab at me! Through the door, there's another suspended flower here, which we can use the boomerang on. This will act as a raft in the water for us to use in conjunction with the leaf in a section that would inspire some parts of Minish Cap as well as Breath of the Wild. Before you head into the next room, there's also an optional room through the side door here, in which you can get a treasure chart. But back to the main path, the next room is where we can find the boss key. We'll want to use the boomerang once more. You can stand atop the house and target all 5 switches. Just make sure to start with this one, as hitting an obstacle will halt it, and this tree is placed just in the way. Now we can grab the boss key, but before we can go, a couple of moblins will drop in to confront us. If you've been having trouble with these guys, the boomerang will stun them and open them up for attack. Once they're defeated, the door we came through will remain locked, but the upper door on the second floor will open. This will loop us to the upper ledge of that branching hallway from before, eliminating a good deal of backtracking so we can quickly return to the central room. You can use this propeller switch to activate an updraft somehow and glide back up. There's a final door to go through on the ground floor of the central room. There's one more short hallway with some wingless Mothulas, and we'll be in the room with the boss door. There's one final cauldron to unlock here, so if you need to do any more backtracking for secrets you missed, you can return here quickly. But otherwise, we can head through the boss door. When we enter the boss room, we'll see Makar, our missing Korok, alone on a flower bed. However, it turns out that this is the boss, which reveals itself just in time to eat Makar. It uses Dexy Vines to hoist itself onto the ceiling and initiate the fight. This is Cal Demos. From a visual standpoint, I really like this design. Considering he's a plant-themed boss, they could have gone in a far more bland direction, but instead, he's incredibly vibrant. From a gameplay standpoint, I take issue with the fact that this is a blatant rehash of the Baronade fight from Ocarina of Time. You'll want to use the boomerang to cut the vines and detach him from the ceiling, which will open him up for attack. He uses vines with claws to attack from the ground as well, which he does pretty quickly and aggressively, so make sure to stay on the move. After grounding him and striking, make sure also to move back, or you'll get swallowed briefly and spat out. Repeat this a few times and he'll be defeated. There's no phase 2 of this fight, but it's a perfectly serviceable boss battle. Once he's down, we'll find Makar is okay. We get our heart container and we'll warp back to the Forest Haven. The Deku Tree gives us Faror's Pearl, and we'll get to witness the Korok ceremony before they all depart for the seas to plant new trees. And that's the dungeon. At a glance, the Forbidden Woods doesn't seem like a spectacular dungeon. It starts with a linear slog forward, and then the progression gets pretty generic from there. But upon closer examination, the dungeon actually does a lot right. That linear slog is actually there to slowly ease us into these new mechanics, which the dungeon then starts to elaborate on, as the puzzles get more and more complex. Even with the most classic returning item, the boomerang, while being iterative of earlier appearances, is still expanded upon in this game with its new multi-lock-on system. The dungeon appearance also has a great deal of depth to it. The very idea of this dungeon being the corrupted and abandoned hometown of the Kokiri sits in my gut like nostalgia coupled with a feeling of loss. It's wonderfully done. As usual though, I do have my complaints. For example, there are tons of secrets and most of them are just pointless, usually amounting to rupees or joy pendants, and many of these are placed in pretty weird spots. In particular, the 2 chests in the second room of the dungeon, which you can only open after you get the boomerang. It's annoying having to backtrack for these. This room is cool on your first go through it, but is painfully slow to navigate on subsequent visits. On the flip side of things, one of the coolest puzzle rooms is found right before you get the boss key, but it's entirely optional and very easy to accidentally skip. It's a shame because that feels to me like squandered potential. It's at least a treasure chart, which is more useful, but this room combines so many of the puzzle elements teased throughout the dungeon and feels really like these ideas coming to fruition. It's almost a shame to think that people could pass right by it instead of it being better incorporated into the dungeon. That said, I've personally gained a newfound appreciation for the Forbidden Woods. To the unacquainted, it may seem like a cliche run-of-the-mill dungeon, but Ocarina of Time fans will find something far more tragic in the dungeon's subtext. It's not my favorite dungeon in the game, but I really like the way it builds upon many previous ideas without them feeling overdone. It's well crafted, and I think it really holds up. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for when the next one comes out. Just want to take a quick moment to say thank you to the lovely people who supported me on Patreon. In particular, those who supported at the cheese tier or higher, which includes Tetra, Brenda, Callie, Justin, and Finley. Thank you so much, you guys, for the support, and I will catch you all next time. Bye bye!